went from All right. Hi, I'm Kent Weakley, and I'm excited to be here tonight to share with you guys how I started birding and how I got to my big year in Marion County last year. And I'm going to start off probably a little different than most birders that do this presentation. And I'm not going to tell you that I've been birding for decades or that I've been birding since I was 8 years old. Instead, I started birding in 2021. So I've climbed a pretty quick learning curve very quickly, and I'm going to share with you how I got started. The first half of this presentation is going to be a little bit of background about me and how I got to where I am now, and then I'm going to talk specifically about the big year in Marion County last year. So I am an artist. I'm a graphic designer. I'm a photographer. I'm a wood turner, and so I've always been involved in art and creating my whole life. So my business is actually Blue Sky Graphic Communication is an advertising graphic design firm that I founded in 1990. And I do all sorts of different projects. And I've got a variety here that I'm going to share with you guys. I did all of well, let's see what we got here. I did the horse fever project, all the promotional work for the original horse fever program. I created that. I did their book. I did all their marketing, all their advertising. I did the anniversary year, which was 10 years after that. I've basically been involved with the Horse Fever Project since the very beginning. I did all of the 19th century masterworks. If anybody's been in Ocala for a while, you may have seen this show at the Appleton. This obviously has been quite a while ago, but I did all the marketing and promotional work for this show. The Appleton averages 20,000 visitors per year. In that particular quarter, between September and December, we managed to get over 2 million visitors to the Appleton Museum. It was a fun project to be part of. One of my larger clients is Petland. It's based out in Ohio, and I would do a variety of different campaigns for them. This is a poster advertising campaign, and this gives you an idea of some of the photography that I do commercially. And you may immediately notice how this is different than birding photography, because this is very controlled and very, very intentional, and it is not like birding photography. So this is my background. I do a lot of commercial photography. It's very arranged. It's very intentional. I also do graphic design. This is a logo I created for Tuscaloosa Art Park. I do a variety of different corporate logos. I also created a virtual CD-ROM for the Chicago Cubs. This is an interactive digital piece. This has been a while back, but it was a fun project to do. And I do different campaigns. This was a program to get students to participate and graduate from high school more, and this was done with Palm Chevrolet. This is a project that we did for them. I do advertising campaigns. This is for Via Paradisus. I actually had, this is one of my larger campaigns, and one of my larger clients was kind of crazy. It's pretty fun. And there's a fun parallel here. This is an ad campaign that I did for a Rhodesian Ridgeback. This ad campaign was strictly published in Dog News magazine. These were full-size tabloid ads. And we ran a different ad every single week for 2 years. And I only had 2 opportunities to photograph this dog. This dog is located in South Carolina, and I was flown on a private jet to this dog to photograph it twice. And I photographed it on a white sweep. I had to have all of the concepts and the ideas for every single ad that we were going to run for this dog planned out ahead of time, with an idea of how we're going to shoot it. And I would shoot every single scene with this dog, basically in 2 different opportunities. And when we were done, the whole intention was to get this dog to Westminster, which it did, and it placed in Westminster. And what happens is, and what's really funny is, if you've ever seen the movie Best in Show, it parallels the big year. It's like, if you're not a birder and you watch the big year, you might think, oh, that's funny. And that was a fun comedy, and I enjoyed the movie, but that's probably not the way birding really works. But there are a lot of parallels there. Well, there's a movie called Best in Show, and it's about this whole world of people entering their dogs in dog shows. It's kind of fun to check out. But at the very end of this campaign, at 2 years, we did a 2-page spread that featured a majority of the ads that were created for this particular dog. It was a very intense period of time to do that ad campaign, but it was a lot of fun at the same time. This is an ad that I created for Marion County. And this is kind of typical. It's an ad campaign series of ads that I do for Great American Insurance. And this is a book cover design that's featuring one of my photographs. This is the butterflies from Central Mexico, the migrating butterflies of Central Mexico. And we're going to touch on that in a little bit as well. So that's kind of some of my commercial stuff that I do. I also do fine art photography. This is infrared black and white photography. I love photographing things that are just different in the way that we can't see them. They're not necessarily something that we're just going to see and it's going to be captured. It's going to be something a little bit different. And so what infrared light is basically all living foliage in direct sunlight reflects infrared light that we can't see. And you see that in the leaves of these trees. Well, essentially, this is digital, by the way. There was a time back in the 70s where you could do this with infrared film. But all digital cameras see infrared light, and they have to have filters put on the sensors to block out that infrared light. Well, cameras can be modified so that you can see the infrared light, and that's what I shoot with. Now, these are horizontal stitched landscapes. Now, what I've got is my tripod's actually set up, and I'm shooting vertically so that I'm shooting vertical images and multiple images. So this particular image is made up of about 9 to 12 photographs that are all overlapping and stitched together. And these were stitched together manually in Photoshop. And that was before there was software that would do that automatically for you. So I did a pretty big series of these infrared black and white landscapes, a lot of them here in Marion County. And then there'd be moments when the light was just right and you would get these just amazing scenes. And I just really enjoyed doing this. This is one of those things I really connected with. And I took it as far as doing the art show circuit for many years with this as well. And then I also did a lot of black and white infrareds when we traveled. This is in Cape Cod. This is the Alamo. This is pretty funny. If you've ever been to the Alamo, you realize that something's kind of odd here. The ability to have nobody standing in front of the Alamo is probably very, very rare. Well, so this is a little bit longer. This is actually made up of about 15 images, and if you can imagine, I'm only shooting one little section at a time, and then I slide the camera over and shoot the next section. And because it's on the tripod, I don't have to really worry about it too much. I just move it over a little bit. So what I would do is I actually wait until the particular section that I'm shooting has nobody in it, or the person, if there's somebody there, they've moved, and I'll take multiple images and take those people out in Photoshop so you don't see them. But it's essentially the whole scene shot together. Now, the color that you're seeing there was shot separately with a color camera, and then I would put that back into the image afterwards. So there's a lot of work that's done on these, but the white infrared is all shot directly in the camera. This is in Tuscany. These are all grapevines. And this is give you an idea. And the other thing that's happened is that if I were to photograph this with the camera just set horizontally, I would not capture that much detail. If I tried to blow this up really large, it's just going to fall apart and pixelate. But because I'm shooting it in sections, and each section is a full frame of data, there's tons of information in here. So give you an idea, we'll zoom into the cypress on the side. Here you can see the detail of all the other farms and the properties behind that as they're kind of rolling off into the distance. And this is my booth that I've had in the art show circuit for quite a while. So I love finding things that are different, even if it's just a simple morning sunrise and the color coming up. This is a tree that was near where I live that I just love photographing this tree. This is these are star trails. These are long exposure star trails and shot during a meteor shower. If you look down in the lower left, you can see a little streak there. That was a capturing of a meteor that went through that particular scene. These are exposures are about 2 minutes long, and there's dozens of them, and these have all been stitched together in the computer. And then what happens is, if you can see, because you're actually witnessing the rotation of the Earth, you can actually see that where the location, can't quite see it, but over to the right side is where the North Star is behind that tree, because it's what we're rotating around, or appears as if what we're rotating around. Now, this is an HDR image. This is high dynamic range, meaning essentially a high dynamic range image means that you're opening up the shadows so they don't appear as dark. You're bringing information in on those shadows so they're not very dark, and very bright areas are toned down so they're not blown out white. It's a little surreal looking, but it works well for this image, because during the daytime, these photographs basically look like bark. There are hundreds of thousands of monarchs attached to these trees. And these are the oyame trees in central Mexico, where the monarchs migrate every winter. Here you can see how they attach themselves to the tree. So there's something I like to keep coming back to, and I always remind myself about the monarchs, is when we start thinking we know how things work, and we kind of, or if you hear somebody explaining something that they sound really definite about, well, this is the way this is, and there might be some question in your mind, and like, I don't know about that. I think back to the monarchs, because this is pretty amazing. So the monarchs you see here, these are the wintering monarchs. Humans have labeled these super monarchs, and the reason they're labeled super monarchs is because they live for up to and over 6 months, where most other monarchs only live between 4 to 6 weeks. So what happens is these monarchs make it to these trees. These are oyame trees. And there's another thing that's pretty amazing, is this isn't this massive forest like the Ocala National Forest, as an example, where they're just in all of the trees in the forest. They are literally in areas that are smaller than a few dozen acres. These migrating monarchs weren't discovered until the 1970s. They didn't even know where the monarchs were going in the wintertime. So what happens is they get here in the fall, they overwinter. In spring, they head up to northern Mexico, Louisiana, Texas, those areas. They lay their eggs, they die. The next generation continues a little bit farther north. They lay their eggs, they die. They continue all the way to northern United States into Canada, laying their eggs, passing away, laying their eggs, passing away, and then they continue back the same pattern. The monarchs return to these same exact trees, but they are 8 to 12 generations away from these monarchs. And again, it's these specific trees. It's not this large general area. It's this specific oyame trees. It's a conifer tree. And so it's mind-boggling. And then to add to that, which is really, really spectacular, is inside the chrysalis, and I'm sure this is true with most butterflies, but with the monarchs especially, you think, well, we have this little caterpillar that has eyes and has feet, and it has all these body parts. So it goes into the chrysalis, and those eyes and those feet become the eyes and the feet of the butterfly. Well, that's not true. Inside the chrysalis, there is a liquid soup that has no identifying markers whatsoever that tie the caterpillar to the butterfly. And we can't explain that. So we can't, as humans, I'm just kind of generalizing here, but we as humans can't explain how they go from a chrysalis into a butterfly. And we can't explain or even begin to comprehend how they're getting back to these same trees 8 to 12 generations away from these butterflies. So I like to keep that in mind when we think about things in big pictures. So I do a lot of other photography. I do things that I really enjoy. I do a lot of action photography. This is an air-to-air photo shoot that I did. This is a P-51 Mustang. And this is kind of a fun challenge. If you've ever done photography, you know it's really difficult to make moving things look stationary. And there's a lot of fine tuning that goes on to make this particular image, and a lot of trial and error. For instance, this plane has a prop that has 4 propellers, and at the end of those propellers, the tips are yellow. Well, shot at 1/80th of a second, you see the gaps between those 4 propellers, but shot at 1/60th of a second, you see a continuous circle. In order to shoot this plane at 1/60th of a second and make the plane look sharp, but the prop blurred, you have to be moving exactly the same speed as the plane. And the way that's done is I'm actually riding in a jump plane, which is basically like a mini bus with wings that has a big door in the back that opens up. And I've got just this flimsy little harness on with a little clip that goes into this D ring that's about like the ring in the 3-ring binder when you were in 4th grade, and that's clipped to the floor. I've got no parachute or anything, and I'm sitting Indian style with my knees hanging out over the edge, and I'm photographing this plane as it's flying about 100, 150 feet behind us at exactly the same speed. But a 60th of a second in photography might sound fast, but it's actually very slow. Here's another example of that. So light and subject matter, all of that come into play here. Look at the sunrise. This is just after sunrise. You have the sun that's streaking across. Look at the trees in the background with the fog, and that is just, it's a lot of fun to be able to witness things like this, and then to be able to photograph it as well. And this is a similar scene. It's actually very similar color of light, but this was actually in Washington at the mall. Actually, the boys and I were up there for the spring break, and we went in. I don't have a bird list from this. I probably should try to do this. I don't know if I can identify all of these from just their silhouettes, but this, it was a rainy day. It was a Sunday, and we almost didn't go into the mall, but we knew the traffic would be light because it was Sunday. And right as we got to the mall, there were breaks in the cloud and light was coming through. And we had this incredible environmental light effect that happened. And this scene, I love this scene because it's got the Capitol in it, it's got the Washington Monument, it's got the Smithsonian, it's got the World War II Memorial, it's got the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool in it. It's just a fun image, and then the quality of that light is so unique, and it's just momentary. These are those moments where it's only there for maybe 5 minutes, and then it's completely different. This is Palouse, Washington. This is another area of our country that's actually just gorgeous. There's a lot of wheat that's grown here, and there's essentially, this area is believed to have been washed out by a huge water flood event that basically moved through here and left the silt behind. There's areas where the soil here, it feels like talcum powder for like 3 or 4 feet on top, and it's perfect for growing all these different grain crops. This is the Bixby Creek Bridge in Big Sur. And I was out photographing at blue hour, which is, there's a moment of time after the sun is set and it's down below the horizon where the color of the light that the camera sees goes to this purple blue color, and that's known as blue hour. And it's only it's a small window, and then everything will go black. And I'm just trying to get something here. And typically it works great if you have some type of artificial light with it. And I was fortunate enough to make a few images where I had cars that were going through here. These are about 2-minute exposures. So you're getting the tail lights and headlights of cars that are going through. This is the Newport Bridge in Rhode Island. Of course, the Golden Gate Bridge. I just enjoy doing these landscapes. But now, coming from a commercial photography background and doing landscape and fine art photographies, I spend a lot of time setting up and waiting. I would spend hours getting ready, looking for the different angles that I want to shoot this, and then waiting for the sun to go down, waiting for the light to get right. And then there's a few moments when the sky will be this color, get the shot, and then I'll be done. But sometimes these shoots will take 4 or 5 hours. So I was building up a lot of patience, and that helped out with birding as well. This is Mesa Arch in Arches National Park. This is the scene that you see pretty frequently of sunrise coming up through Mesa Arch. And we were in this area during the afternoon one time. We were about an hour's drive away, and it occurred to me that the moon was going to be full the next day. Now, that's really important. If you ever want to shoot a landscape image with the moon visible in it and the landscape still lit, the best day to shoot that is the day before the full moon. And here's Mesa Arch with the full moon rising into the east. And the reason this is the full moon essentially looks full the day before it's actually full, but it's actually rising about 45 minutes earlier than it will on the day of the full moon. That means that the sun and the light from the sun is still illuminating the landscape. So you can actually, with one shot, and it's going to happen pretty quickly. It's going to be a narrow window when the landscape's still lit and the moon's not too bright. But wait a little bit longer, the landscape will get dark and that moon will just become a white ball and you won't have any detail on the moon. So it's kind of a fun thing to do. And then this is Mesa Arch at a totally different time at about 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm actually standing on Mesa Arch over the side. There's software that you can use to actually determine where the different portions of the Milky Way will be located. And this is kind of the main heart of the Milky Way. And it was located about 3 o'clock in the morning above Mesa Arch. And this is that tree. I like doing these type of things. This was actually kind of setting me up for going to different birding sites and locations here in the county over and over again. I love photographing this tree at different times. And actually I set up a kind of a project a while back and photographed this every single hour for one day. Every single hour on the hour, I'd go photograph this tree. And I had this series of images from this, and I've made other pieces of artwork from that. I love different, our country is amazing. We have so many different, amazing, beautiful things to see, and I love lighthouses. This is the Nubble Lighthouse in York, Maine. Here it is with Blue Hour again. This is Portland Head, Bass Harbor. And this is the difference between sunset and Blue Hour about 45 minutes after sunset. This is a fun little place in Vermont. So prior to my I would say 2021 is when I really started birding. Prior to that, it would take a really big creature or a really big bird to get my attention to go photograph it. Instead, I'm looking to do these really controlled, very intentional landscapes. And this would be a good candidate here. We've got a moose, and that's pretty big. I'll obviously photograph that. This is actually a trip Max and I were up in Maine photographing, and this is pretty fun. This moose is probably 300 yards away from me, and we just happen to have this rock that is at water level. I'm literally, the camera is a couple inches above water level. On that right image, you can actually see the moose is in the center of the shot. That's how far out it is. But if you've ever seen moose in the wild, they love aquatic vegetation. So they'll stick their head underwater and eat the aquatic plants for sometimes over a minute. And then they'll pull their head up, and this bull moose with his antlers would actually hold that water, and it just comes pouring off his antlers. So it makes this really cool image if you can get it. So it's kind of fun. But again, up till this time, I really wasn't doing much unless it was really dramatic. This is going down the highway in Oregon. I'm watching these ravens acting crazy, and then all of a sudden I see this eagle, and I realize they're going after this eagle. I'm like, I have to pull off the highway, and this was a busy highway too. I pulled off the highway and backed up, and I was able to get this shot. But again, this was the bigger birds are what captured my attention back then. This is a bird that was feeding up in Ketchikan. So when I would do these landscape images, a lot of times I would have Max with me, and I would try to get him so excited about the light and the quality of the light and looking for these angles and these perspectives and all that. And he would listen, and he absorbed everything about the photography, and he loves it, but he just loves animals. And so when I would be doing this, and of course I'd be spending hours doing it, he would be out wandering around looking for anything, birds, critters, things crawling around. And this is the Marshall headlight in Maine. And this is actually the lighthouse that's featured in Forrest Gump, where he runs up to the lighthouse and then runs back. So I was doing this. I was waiting for the sky to change, waiting for the light to change. And meantime, Max is everywhere checking out everything. You can actually see him in the lower left side of this image. And he's checking out a small tidal pool down here. So that's the difference between Max and I. I'm really into the controlled landscape aspects of it at this point, and Max really loved all of the animal aspects. And that's because since he's little, he's been reading animal books and absorbing detailed information about animals all on his own for years. We provided him with countless books of anything to do with animals, birds, you name it, he knows it. And he's known for the fact that he's very, very knowledgeable about all the animal things. So when the kids were young, we got an RV and we did a lot of traveling. My wife got me this map, which was a blessing and a curse. Once the map was there, it's kind of like a bird list. We've got to get the whole list. So we did do all 48 continental states. This is Max on the left and Lucas, my other son, on the right. We did all 48 states, and we did about 44 national parks and monuments in the course of about 7 years. And this would be a typical setup. Now, I got the boys both cameras early on, and they got small Nikon digital cameras, and they loved it, and they photographed the things they were interested in. So I helped them process their images back then, and I would be doing mine at the same time. So this is a typical setup. I would be sitting here for hours, moving around a location, looking for the different angles to capture an image, and these guys would be running around photographing everything. So this is very typical. This is my wife Maggie and Lucas and Max. This is over at Ocala in Louisiana. And we traveled the whole country and just had a blast. We just really, really great experience, tons and tons of images, and we just had a lot of great experiences. And the first time we went to the Grand Canyon, we had this incredible bird experience, and it was just phenomenal. We were up at the rim of the canyon, and we were just inundated with condors. There were condors everywhere. They were flying by. Some were coming by almost at head level. We had one that came towards us across the canyon, and I saw it from a distance, and I swore it was a Cessna. My brain went, I started thinking, how in the world did somebody get permission to fly across the Grand Canyon that low? It's the dihedral on the condors, unlike the turkey vultures, which is more V-shaped. Their dihedral, or the angle of their wings, is almost flat. And it was just gliding straight at us. It looked like a Cessna from far away. So it was amazing. And in our travels, we've since had a couple chances to go past the Grand Canyon, and you can't pass the Grand Canyon. You have to go to the Grand Canyon, and we have never seen the condors again. So that is actually a really good lesson for birding and photography of birding: is don't ever pass up an opportunity. If you have a bird there, or if the light conditions are good, take the image, because you have no idea. Don't ever think that, well, I'm going to just come back later and I'll get that shot, but there's a good chance you won't be able to do it. So by this point, Max was getting really, really excited about birding or animals in general, but birds, and photographing and seeing animals in the wild, and really enjoyed that. And I talked with him, and I said, listen, if you're like this in a few years, then maybe we'll do something that's a little bit bigger, and we'll go on an adventure together. And he really loves elephants, and I'm like, I don't think we can quite do Africa yet, but we can do something. So it was several years later, he and I went here. This is the edge of the Hudson Bay in November, and it's freezing. It's getting close to freezing. The water's not quite frozen yet. And we stayed in this beautiful, luxurious resort right on the edge of the Hudson Bay. It's also known as a Tundra Lodge. This is essentially these different vehicles that are pulled together. And we went there specifically to see polar bears, and we had the most amazing time. This is the week of Thanksgiving. This has been about 10 years ago. It might be a little longer than that. But essentially, what happens is this lodge is set up. You can see it's on wheels, and it's moved right to the edge of the Hudson Bay, and then after the season, it's pulled back into town, into Churchill. This is Churchill, Manitoba, Canada. The base of these vehicles and the tundra buggies that we're riding in when we go out to explore the polar bears is about 6 feet up, and then the railings on these are about 12 feet up. The bears can stand up and reach their nose up to about 11 feet. Their hands or their arms do not reach above their nose. They're kind of like little T-Rexes. They can't reach above their head with their arms. So they can sniff and look up, and they look really cute and cuddly. But that's kind of a misperception. They are very, very deadly. Probably one of the most ferocious mammals on Earth. These are the tundra buggies that we would go out exploring each day. And we had parkas from them. The temperatures were unbelievably cold. But the opportunity to be there and to see this was phenomenal. So this kind of helped set the path for Max for his continue his love of animals and get him involved with biology and all of the things that he's currently involved with. And I wanted to point this out. This was interesting. As I was going through these images, there's a couple different things that are interesting. You go back to, I think back to the monarchs, and you think back to, we've had some images in the media of polar bear on a small piece of ice, and we talked about the narrative is that's horrible, and it's dangerous for the climate change and all that sort of stuff. And the problem is that the reality of that is that that's not accurate. The polar bear's Latin name is Ursus maritimus, which means bear of the sea. And they are designed to be in the water. The fact that that bear was on a small piece of ice was irrelevant. There have been polar bears found over 100 miles at sea and in the Hudson Bay by ship captains that are not stressed. They're simply going about what they do. And they depend on the sea to have very thin ice because or the lake to have very thin ice. They go out on the thin ice looking for holes for seals that have come through the holes, and they will stand above those holes almost like a cartoon character. They'll stand above those holes with their paws out for hours at a time, waiting for a seal to come up through those holes. So the idea that a bear with a small amount of ice is bad for the bear is completely incorrect. The bears are totally fine in the water, and this is their environment. The other thing that's interesting is there were images of bears that were emaciated and they were starving. And that was also kind of fed into this whole idea that the bears were, they're not getting the food that they need, et cetera, et cetera. But here's part of that reality, and this is potentially one of the bears that went down this path. The guides would call this bear Snaggletooth because he has this tooth that sticks out of the side. If you look, his jaw is kind of angled to the left. And what happens, this is an adult male. The adult males are incredibly aggressive, and they will become territorial, and they'll fight with one another, and they will kill each other. But a lot of times what they'll do is they'll open their jaws and lock their jaws together. And if they start throwing their weight around, which are hundreds of pounds, they will disfigure one another. And this bear has had its jaw twisted to the side. There's actually a good chance that his other canine, or whatever they call that tooth, is actually being pushed into the roof of his mouth. But he's also weakened because of this, and the other bears know that. So if he gets in another fight like that and his lower mandible is damaged further, he can't chew. And if he can't chew, he's not going to eat. And what's going to happen? He's going to starve to death. And if he's seen and there's a photograph that's taken of him, he's going to look emaciated. And that's part of the circle of life, unfortunately. And that's how the wild is out here. Unfortunately, a lot of those images are being pulled out of context and used to fit certain agendas, and that's not always the case. So it's kind of an interesting thing to go see it there live and understand how this actually works in the wild. But the bears are absolutely beautiful, and it's very deceptive because they will control and hold back their energy, or conserve their energy rather. But we had a couple occasions when a rabbit or something caught their attention, and they go from this slow, docile look to aggressive and incredibly fast in a snap. And it was frightening to watch. So it's just something to keep in mind. It's kind of fun because all the images we see of this, we think of this cute little soft, fuzzy, cute bear, and it's definitely soft and fuzzy, but that's about as far as it goes. We had some great opportunities, especially the last few days with the sunlight coming out. Now, this bear was actually pretty close to us. We had bears all around the lodge there. This bear has tags in his ear. This is not a zoo bear. This is a released captive bear. Now, what that means is the town of Churchill has had bears that would come, or they still have bears that come into the town. Back in the 70s and 80s, they would simply shoot the bears because they were incredibly dangerous, and they would potentially hurt people. So they would shoot them. But at the time, tourism was minimal, but they started realizing if we kill these bears, nobody's going to be coming up here as tourists. So they actually developed a system where they have patrols that can come and capture bears and bring them to this facility. This is a former fish packing plant that has been turned into a polar bear jail. So to give you an idea how much these bears eat, in the course of the winter, they will consume the majority of all of the calories they need for the entire year. And in this when the spring warms up and they come back into land, and summertime, they're foraging for minor things. They'll eat berries and things like that, but they're not really eating anything of substance, and they don't need to. They can actually survive all the way until the lake freezes again. Inside this building are concrete cells, just like prison cells that have been set up. And any bear that comes into the town, they're captured. They use a container on a trailer, like you see on the right here, with meat or bait in it, and they bait them, they bring them into the cell, and they put them in that cell. And the only thing they give them is water until this time, late November, when the lake freezes. And like I said, we were fortunate enough to be there right when the lake was starting to freeze. So these guys were being released back out to the lake. So they drive them out one at a time, right to the edge of the lake. And this is a perfect example of not allowing the animals to become habituated to human food, going through garbage cans, being fed by people, or finding different things, or eating dogs, things like that. So it prevents that process, keeps the animals wild, and gets them back out into the wild. As soon as they can get out to the lake, they know that there's seals out there and they're gone. And they will continue moving north for hundreds of miles all winter, and until spring, and then they come back into land, and they will come back down to this edge. They come to Churchill because that's the area of the lake that starts to freeze first, and that's where they can get out on the ice and look for those seals. Here you can actually see one of the bears in the trap. It's going back out to the lake. We got to see the aurora borealis, which was pretty amazing. So fast forward to 2021, I also conduct photography workshops for other people. And I had planned on doing a photography workshop in Nebraska to photograph the sandhill crane migration. I was there the year before, and I was scouting this out and found some really good locations and really planned this out. This is about the last week in November, and it's relatively cold, but the sandhill cranes are there. Now, this particular group is a group that goes from about Texas all the way over to Florida, and it bottlenecks right into central Nebraska at the North Platte River. And there's a specific reason why they're there at the North Platte River, and we'll get into that in just a second. And this gives you an idea of the density of these birds. And keep in mind, these are about a 6-foot wingspan, each one of them, and they look like they're right on top of each other. I never saw any of them hit each other. I'm sure some touched, but it was just amazing. There were tens of thousands there at a time, hundreds of thousands in certain situations. So Max and I set up in this one location. We wanted to get down at river level. Now, this is a very shallow river. and it's very wide. And that's incredibly important for this bird. The year before, I went to see a biologist that gave a presentation, and it was an okay presentation. It wasn't well attended. And I think she could have done so much better if she would have titled the presentation, "We're all here because they don't have a back toe." Now, I've since learned from Max that all birds have basically the same number of toes, except they're all configured differently, which is pretty amazing. So birds that climb up barks of trees have different toe configurations, some 2 on top and 2 on the bottom, so they can grip and climb. And there's others that have all sorts of different combinations, and we'll have to talk to him about all the details. But for whatever reason, the sandhill cranes have all of their toes facing forward. They have no gripping claw or any back toe that allows them to grab a branch, so they can't roost in trees. So they don't have the safety of being up high in a tree at night. So instead, what they use is they use water, and they gather together in a group so that they can see. And you can actually see in my camera frame there what we're looking at, but this is us underneath the bridge, and we've got the sound of trucks going over and things, but this is where you get the shot. So we were down there, and here's the scene that we were shooting. You can see that the sandhill cranes are all standing inside the river. If a predator comes in the middle of the night, they can hear it hit the water, and then they have time to react. But this is morning. They're going up. They're in families. They're in family groups, sometimes 2 or 3, sometimes 4 or 5, and then they head back out to the fields. They'll feed. It's believed that each individual bird is usually in this area for about a week and a half to 2 weeks before they continue moving north. So you get these amazing scenes and incredible opportunities to photograph them. And then this is my photography background, is I'm trying to set up for the best situation. So here's another thing that's really interesting about this is the birds will actually start, instead of going directly to the river at sunset, they will congregate in the fields in huge groups. So you can actually drive around and try to find these large groups. And then you can position yourself between the direction they need to fly to get to the river and then the sun. And that's what I did in this particular case. And I was fortunate enough to get this image. There's another image after sunset. You can see just the density of these birds moving over to the river. So we shot the birds for a couple days, and Max said, "Well, let's go over to this little nature preservation area, and I want to go see some of the other birds." And I said, "Max, well, are there going to be sandhill cranes there?" And he's like, "No, I don't think so." I'm like, "Well, why are we going?" I couldn't put it together. And the town is called Funk, Nebraska. So here's Max and I in a funk. We're not in a funk, but we're in Funk, Nebraska. So we're walking around the trails here, and it was just, there was something, it finally clicked for me. I'm like, wait a minute, this is really cool. All these little guys are just as cool as the big birds. And we had an opportunity to see a few pheasants there. But I got to tell you, for whatever reason, it was this shot of these 3 brown-headed cowbirds. And I guess I just had never looked at them closely before. And I know they're not the best bird. I know they've got the bad reputation, and I know trust me, Max has told me all the things about them. But I was really pleased with this image, and it kind of got me excited about going around finding more small birds and seeing more. And at the same time, Max started introducing me to the idea of using eBird to make a bird list, which I love lists and I love data. So I'm like, it's all starting to come together. So this is kind of a really big turning point for me. This is March of 2021. So we're back in Ocala, and I've been hearing a lot about the wetland recharge park. And I thought, I should go over and check it out. So I'm not there more than 5 minutes, and I'm watching these birds bounce around in this vegetation. And I had looked through a little bit of different bird information, and I convinced myself these were yellow-headed blackbirds. And as I'm shooting this, there's 2 people across the pond, or across this particular cell, and one of them was Michelle and the other one was Jim. So I ended up meeting Michelle that day, And they informed me these are bobolinks. And I was like, it's bobolinks or bobolinks. I kind of like bobolinks, but I was just blown away. I'm like, wait a minute, how could this bird be here in Ocala? I had no idea. I just had no idea. And quite honestly, even to this day, it's embarrassing to admit this, that I've spent as much time out in nature that I do, and I wasn't aware of all of these little birds. You see them zip by and you think, oh, that was a blackbird. And you would just generalize it and just say, well, that's a blackbird. Or if you're at the beach, it's like, oh, it's a seagull. Like, well, now I know that those aren't such a thing. They're very specific. This is a bobolink. So I started getting a little more intentional, and I started letting go of my need to have perfect photos based on my background of doing commercial photography and landscape photography. And sometimes they're not perfectly sharp, but wow, these birds are absolutely amazing. So I was kind of hooked. And so by this time, it's summer of 2021. And everybody's telling me nobody birds in summer. The birds aren't really here, and it's not easy to bird in the summer, and it's hot. And well, it was hot, but I was having too much fun with it. So I just birded like crazy and just really enjoyed it. And I started racking up the birds for Marion County. And I'd also do some trips to different locations and see what's around, and just really had a good time, feeling like I'm finally seeing birds like for the first time. This was in the summer of 2021. I had made a trip up to Illinois, for my family's up in Illinois, and stopped by this particular place in Indiana, and happened to come across some cedar waxwings. I had no idea. I had no idea that cedar waxwings are even visible. I'd seen these in images, and I just figured these were some exotic bird that was off in some faraway land that, you're not going to get to see that in real life, but you can see images of it. But no, they're right here. And it came across this place where there was a migrating group of martins, and that was just amazing as well. So it's fall 2021, and I started thinking I need to do a big year. I got up to about 185 birds in Marion County, and I didn't do any birding during the spring migration. We made some trips over to the coast and got some coast birds, and really, again, starting to see these birds for the first time. You see these when you go to the beach, but if you're not really looking, you don't see them. And then got really lucky, and I started doing more birding with Max. In particular, we came across a clay-colored sparrow. And just seeing again, I had never seen a towhee before. I had no idea. If you see this bird from more than 100 yards away, you might think, oh, it's another blackbird. And of course, the scrub jays, I knew about the scrub jays, but couldn't figure out where to find them. I know where they're at now. So the end of 2021, we went up to my folks and my family in Illinois for Christmas. And the funny thing was, we got there, my sister-in-law, Max and I were telling her that we're going to go out and do some birding. It's cold outside. She looked at us and she said, you're going to go birding now? It's winter. There's no birds here. I'm like, yeah, okay. So we went out birding, and we got to see new species and had a great time. Of course, this is the dark-eyed junco. This wood creeper is so cool. If this bird could hold still, like the cuckoo hold still, you would never find it. It is so well camouflaged. It's absolutely amazing, but it kind of hops around almost like a black and white warbler. The white-throated sparrow. And here's one of those examples of it's not a perfect image. I couldn't get the sharpness in. This little guy was bouncing around. Of course, it's like the ruby-throated or the ruby crown, but this is the golden-crowned kinglet. I was able to get a really cool shot of a golden crown, or golden-crowned kinglet. And it is not quite as sharp as I'd like it to be, but you just have to let those things go. This is not commercial photography. And it definitely brings your skills up very fast, and your ability to move quick and focus fast. So now I'm back in Ocala. It's 2022. I decided this is it. I'm birding. I'm going to do a big year in Marion County, and I'm going hard. I didn't get back into Ocala until January 3rd. Everybody makes a big deal about birding on January 1st and doing a big day. Well, in 3 days, I had 100 birds in Marion County, and I just birded nonstop. We were talking about this a little bit earlier, is that the majority of the year, I simply birded without thinking of anything else and just bird, go out every morning and bird. I typically had a location that I wanted to start at with the hopes of getting a certain bird, and I would just go and bird as much as I possibly could. And it could be very exhausting. There were a lot of times, especially in December, January, where I would have preferred to stay in bed, but couldn't do that all the time. Now, I did break it up a little bit by going to some different locations. Like here, I went to South Florida and was able to get some other birds that were not typical in Marion County. Now we do have the vermilion flycatcher here right now, and we had it last year, but we had the female, and this is the male, and this beautiful painted bunting. This was in South Florida. And then of course Carol had her Rufus hummingbird, which is just amazing. So the trick is to basically, you just have to go out there and put in the hours, because there's no other way. It's kind of it's a work reward effort, and it's all a numbers game. And I read a book, and I can't think of which book it was. I've been going through a lot of birding books, but there was a book that was talking about how many hours you have to put in to see certain birds. Like, for instance, you can go out and within an hour you can find a cardinal, but it may take you 1,000 hours to see a golden crowned kinglet, and it may take 10,000 hours to see a reddish egret in Marion County, but it's been here before. But you've got to be out there when it's here. That's the trick. And the other thing is that I can't stop thinking about, with doing all this birding, is how many birds go unseen. I think about how many birders are actually intentional about birding in Marion County, and there's just a handful of birders, and there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of birds that pass through here. And what birds have passed through here that haven't been seen? So we made this is a purple sandpiper over in Daytona. And I would do trips and kind of break it up. I would do trips to different places. I would go out to the beach. I went up to St. Mark's, and there'd be some images here from that. And this is Pinky from St. Mark's up in the Panhandle. And this was January, towards the end of January. And I got my first Cape May warbler there. And it made no sense because it wasn't supposed to be there. It was a rare bird alert. And the reviewer there challenged me. I'm like, I have a picture of it right here. And it was moving from the water up into the park. And I don't know if it was passing through and going someplace else. Anyway, I was thrilled to see it. So this is what you hope for when you're photographing birds. You're hoping for great light, great poses, great color, and putting that all together. But for every picture that you have that looks this clean, there are literally thousands of others that you have to discard. There's just no way around it. So I went through and accumulated as many birds as I could, and then started systematically thinking through how I'm going to get to the ones that are a little bit more difficult, and doing research, doing a lot of data. So when I got doing this as thoroughly as I was doing it, my wife asked me, she goes, why are you doing this? And I'm guessing there's a lot of spouses and partners out there that probably ask the same question of all birders. Why are you doing this? And I initially thought I was going to answer with some kind of smart aleck remark that would be like, just a quick little answer. And then I sat and thought about it for a second. I'm like, that's a good question, actually. And, there's all the obvious reasons. It's a connection with nature, being outdoors, being able to get physical exercise and all of that. But there are so many other reasons. Developing your patience, awareness, being present, just being able to be in the moment and just witness what nature is doing. Having goals. Doing a big year is all about goals. Obviously the year is a main goal, but in reality, every single day is a goal. You go out each day with an objective. You have to plan it. You have to really have some vision and think through what you want to do and go out and do it. This is over at Merritt Island. These black skimmers, actually gorgeous. And this was in March. We went over there on Max's birthday, and this is a willow flycatcher. But I'm sitting here thinking about how quickly I was able to do this. Now, I have the benefit of having Max in my life. Max knows a ton of information, and he helped a lot. I had a lot of mentors and a lot of help from other people. Michelle, Tom Hintz, Scott Robinson, everybody in the group, going to all the different club meetings and getting together people and hearing their excitement about it and seeing what they're learning and how they're doing things, all help and all benefit. So there's all these different aspects that make birding so amazing. And I think back to what happened just 10 years ago or 20 years ago when we didn't have the digital aspect, where you didn't have eBird or the Sibley app and Merlin. How did somebody do this? You pretty much had to have a mentor that was guiding you along the way. And I can't even imagine how difficult that would be. So we're really blessed to have all of this information. If you're curious and you want to know, the information is literally at your fingertip in the field while you're doing the birding. It's not as if you have to come back and go to a library and look up this information. It's right there. And I love this image. Who knew that a purple gallinule had feet that are almost the size of its torso? It's incredible. This is so cool to see these things. So I accumulated 100 birds in 3 days. So by January 6th, I had 100 birds. In 2021, I had 185 birds. So in my mind, I'm thinking if I can get to 190, that would be great. I didn't know. So by May 14th, I was at 200 and I had no idea. I was happy at that point. I was like, I didn't think I can get to 200. That's great. I didn't know if I can go farther than that. So I decided to, instead of making it unrealistic goals, I would do 10 bird increments. So like, okay, let's see if I can get to 210. And slowly but surely, I just keep going out, and occasionally a rare bird would be sighted and you try to go get it. You can't get them all. Sometimes you miss those. This guy eluded me forever. This was a very intentional birding. And sometimes it can get frustrating because I went out for a field sparrow probably 6 times. And these guys are super secretive. And I finally had this guy come out. He was on this branch for probably 3 seconds before it flew off and was never seen again. And luckily, I was able to get focus and get an image of it before it took off. And that's the other thing. Because I know, I felt then that I know so little, and I still believe that I know so little about birds, I feel like I really have to have a photograph of these birds so that I can go back and study it and I can confirm the identification afterwards. So the photos are super important for me. And I was thrilled to get this field sparrow. I didn't get this one in 2021. And here's the cedar waxwings in Ocala. Who knew? Well, obviously all the birders knew, but I didn't know at the time. And I'm blown away by how cool these birds are. All the different wrens, and you've got the different families of birds that have the different characteristics, and you learn how to watch these wrens and pay attention to just the base of this grass and look for any movement. That's the other thing too. With birding, I feel like probably not my actual eyesight, but my vision and being able to see and compute where something is and what's going on magnified intensely. Being able to see a little dinky bit of motion in grass and pick up that that's probably a wren down there is just, it's a lot of fun. The same thing up in the trees. You have an entire oak canopy. It's fun just to look up and have just an open stare. It's almost like you're scanning everything at once, and you can pick up just the littlest movement and then hone in on it and then find a warbler up there. I love doing that. These are eagle fledglings that are right down the street. I think Barb and Marty are very familiar with these. These guys were from last year. These fledglings were actually practicing flying in the nest. They would lift themselves up and drop back down to the nest. I was so afraid watching this. I was afraid they would like drift off the side of the nest, and apparently their wings obviously work, so they would be fine, but it just felt had this like parental fear that they were just going to fall out of this nest. And then to start thinking about all the aspects of these birds and the fact that this bird is spending most of its life up in the North Atlantic area, and it just happens to be visiting us. It's like how crazy blessed are we to be able to have these opportunities to go see these birds. Now, this is fascinating. This is actually a new information for me just recently. This is, of course, a yellow-throated warbler, but it's an Max, help me out with this. It's a Abelora, I believe is how it's pronounced. Abelora. If you see the lora that's above the eye there, between the eye and the top mandible, it's white. Well, guess what? That species is a rare bird alert here in Ocala. And I would not have known that if it weren't for Max. This is the species that should be here and is the normal yellow-throated warbler. Now, what is interesting to me is how this data gets processed and how we determine what's rare and what's not. So I'm wondering how many birders see this and simply put yellow-throated warbler. If you don't know about the subspecies of the yellow-throated warbler, how in the world would you know to put this as an Abelora yellow-throated warbler? But there's a good chance there's probably a lot more of these out there, but people aren't listing that. If you take 100 birders and they get a quick glimpse of this bird, they're simply going to list it as a yellow-throated warbler. But there's a good chance. So now you guys know this. If you see a bird that has that white patch between the eye and the bill, and not this yellow patch between the eye and the bill, then you have an Abelora yellow-throated warbler. So, and you can also, if it doesn't pop up in your list for eBird, you can click on the little, I think it's currently a green link where it says not seeing the bird or something like that. Click on that and it'll list out more species and you'll see the Abelora, and it will be a rare bird alert. So it's a good idea to have a photograph. Another reason why the photograph of the bird is really important. It's just a gorgeous bird. I love this. This is one of the other first ones that I got a chance to see outside my window, and I was just like, whoa, what is that? The blue-headed. This is one of my favorite images of the wide-eyed vireo. This really features that wide eye in the sunlight. These guys, blue-gray gnatcatchers, they're all over in the trees in my yard. They've been here all along, and I'm just now seeing them. And the prairie warblers, absolutely gorgeous. And you gotta love the owls. This is the bobwhite. I think the black and white warbler is one of my favorites. I love the way it appears. It's so graphic, and it really appeals to that graphic nature. There again are the cedar waxwings. I love these guys. Yeah. And the flycatcher is my favorite family to photograph. And it's one of my favorite families in general because they are so cooperative. They're social. It's almost like they know they're being photographed and they're fine with it. Not only that is you can have them in this pose right here, and all of a sudden they'll fly away, they'll go grab their insect, and they'll come right back and they'll set up for you again. It's amazing. Unlike some of the little songbirds that really like to hide around in the dense brush, which makes it very difficult for focusing, these guys are very cooperative. Love the pileated woodpeckers. Here's an example of the different toe configuration. I shouldn't even be talking about it because Max can tell you all the details about that. But I think these have the X formation. You'll have to ask him. And it's just fun to be able to have the opportunity to see different things when they pop out like this thrasher. This little guy was, these black-throated blues were so hard for me to actually get as well. And it's super satisfying. That's the other thing too, is that with using eBird and all that and having all these digital enhancements, it's almost like a gamification. It makes this a fun, it's almost like a live game with working with nature. It's so much fun. So this is down at Fort DeSoto. This was the day after the Kirtland warbler had been spotted. And I was hoping to get that along with about 70 other people. The place was packed. It was the rangers station house, the poor ranger, and it had his yard fenced in, was surrounded with birders. And there was a water feature there, and people were thinking that this Kirtland warbler might come into the water feature. And this bird shot right through over my head and landed in this tree. And it was a Cape May. Well, I'd only seen the Cape May one other time up in St. Mark's. So I was fascinated to see this. And there were 4 or 5 people right off to the side of me. I turned my head and I whispered, "There's a Cape May warbler." And they all rotated their head around about 4 inches, and then they went back to what they were doing and completely ignored me. I was like, okay, well, you guys have seen Cape May warblers apparently. But I had a great time seeing the Cape May warbler really close and in person. Then you get these moments when you have these happy little accidents, this bee passing by the white ibis. So then that's the other thing too, is all of these experiences and going out and birding all the different times, you build up this library of information. The black-polled warbler was hanging out with the Cape May in Fort DeSoto, and the two would be near each other all the time. They were up in the tree together. They were down on the ground feeding together. And guess what? 2 weeks later, got to see a Cape May and a black-polled warbler at Tuscaloosa Park. So it's just funny how those things to go. But once you start understanding, oh, wait a minute, that's a black-polled warbler, and you keep an eye out, you might have a Cape May warbler as well. It's a baby swallowtail kite. Swallowtail kites are so amazing. That's the other thing too, is we think we grow up as a kid and you're like, oh, all the birds go north for summer, way up north into Canada, and then they go south for winter. And well, that's true for some. It's not true for everything. By the way, this lower bird has a frog that it's carrying, and this other one's chasing it, trying to get the frog away from him. I wish that this weren't in the middle of the day and I was able to make better images of this, but this is a Mississippi kite that is diving, and it looks like a fighter jet when it's coming down. It just dropped into this super fast dive, and what it saw was this flying grasshopper, and it came down below the grasshopper, opened its wings like brakes, pulled out its talons, and just in a split second, it was eating this grasshopper. Just incredible to watch. And these and the swallowtail kites are kind of haunting to me. There's something really just odd about watching them use their talons and eat something while at the same time their wings are they're working independent. It's as if there's 2 creatures inside the one creature. So I'm always blown away by when I see this happening, when they're eating and flying at the same time. And there's the Mississippi kite. Got to see this little sandhill crane. It looks like he's missing his wings. They're just not quite developed yet. I love the green herons too. So I had this opportunity at Tuscaloosa Park. A lot of times I'll just go through and do a lap and see if there's anything going on there. And there is a blackneck stilt. And I was itching to get some good close-up pictures of a blackneck stilt. So I'm working along the bank and I'm hoping for a really good image here. And this stilt is watching me really close. You can see its eye seems to be a little more open there. And this is about as close as I could get before it got spooked and then flew left past me. Well, those are those happy little accidents where the thousands of images you take that are kind of okay, you get these one moments that there's one moment occasionally that comes by that makes it all worth it. I happened to catch out of the corner of my eye, for some reason, the stilt decided it wanted to come back and it was going to fly past me to the right. So I had time to set up focus and I was able to make this shot as it flew past. It's probably one of my favorite shots of last year. It's just everything happened and came together perfectly for that one moment. And it's just incredible, the detail in here. And when you can see this up close, you can see the water droplets on his head. You can see the fact that it has different coloration, iridescence in its wings, the green, blue, and the purple. It's just absolutely amazing to see it up close like that. And you can see in its neck how the white feathers interact and overlap with the black feathers. And then if you look at its feet, you can see all the scales and it has black toenails. Who knew? I didn't know that. I just absolutely it's just so fun when you have an opportunity to do this. And I guess every time you go out, you're hoping that a moment like this might happen, but you just never know. Now, another thing that I learned very quick with shorebirds is to make sure, or if you can, get pictures under the wing. This will help with identification immensely. You will greatly be able to improve your shorebird identification if you can get images under those wings or with the wings open. So the American white pelican, there's something stately about this. They feel like these elderly personalities, like they're wise. I love looking into the eyes of these pelicans, and they can do some funny things too. So we're getting towards the end of the year. I had a couple opportunities to see um, the great blue herons. Max and I always call them GBHs. We try to abbreviate that, but I always get a chance to see the GBHs with the snake is kind of unusual. There's a loggerhead shrike with a pretty good sized bug there, and then uh, yeah, the nighthawk, of course. I was drawing a blank there. And this is shot like well after dark and is able to pick this up and actually pan and keep the camera moving with it. It's kind of like going back to that airplane photograph. When the airplane, if you're on the ground photographing that airplane going by, you have to kind of stay with it and basically pan with it and move with it. So it looks somewhat stationary when you actually capture it because you're shooting, the shutter speed is slow in the dark. This is over the beach, and it was just to be able to get on the ground and get close-ups of some of these birds and then be in a situation where they're completely fine with humans is so satisfying to be able to make really clean, crisp images. And then to see like a snowy egret in the breeding plumage, is incredible how they change. This little guy, the ground dove, took me forever. I could not get a ground dove to save my life and get a good image of a ground dove. And I was really happy to get this one with the backlight, really show off of the pink legs and the pink orange bill. Got to see a red knot. And if you do a little bit of research on red knots, there's actually an organizational website about red knots, and they have a really cool interactive map. This bird, or this species of bird, travels basically from the south of the world to the north of the world in every continent around the world. It's unbelievable. This bird travels incredible distances. And I reported this sighting. I was able to get the tag numbers and the number off the band and reported it. Unfortunately, there wasn't any previous data on it, so I didn't collect a bunch of data on it, but I was able to put a report where it was at the time. There's a limpkin's pulling its feathers out and cleaning itself, preening. And you get these little moments where you can see light. You can actually see through the throat of this anhinga. So essentially, trying to answer my wife's question, there are just so many reasons why birding is so amazing. There was only two reasons why I came up with why you wouldn't want to bird, or what's kind of a negative about birding is the fact that it consumes a lot of time and it requires a lot of traveling or fuel. So other than that, there's really no negative aspect to birding, and I just absolutely love it. As a kid, I was a collector. I loved collecting things and listing and collecting the amount of different birds in an area. I love the data as well. I absolutely love data, and I guess that's a little unusual for an artist, but I love data. I love knowing how many birds have been seen at Tuscaloosa Park and the Ocala wetlands and all the different areas, and keep track of all that information and what's been seen at what time of the month and that sort of thing. I love all of that, and I love planning. I love planning trips, all the trips that we did when we were traveling as a family, but all the photography workshops I do. I love planning out every single detail. This was a fun little moment. I got to see these blue-gray gnatcatchers building a nest up at Price Scrub, and I was able to photograph that. And then as you watch that progress and keep going back to Price Scrub over and over again and see how that goes. Now, here's one of those images that you see the curve of this wing of this osprey and everything works. And it's, again, there's another 1,000 images that are mediocre compared to this one. And then here was the nest after it had been used and left. But it's so meticulously built, and they took the lichen from the tree and integrated in the exterior of this, so it blends right in. As a matter of fact, going back and trying to find this nest, sometimes it would take me 5 minutes to try to find it because it blended in so well, and it's so small. So we went up to Illinois in the summer. We typically go there in July, and got to see the blue grosbeak and the yellow warbler, and a bunch of varieties that we have here that are up there summering. So this is the song sparrow. And then back in Ocala, we had the kestrel is just absolutely gorgeous bird. I love photographing kestrels. You can see the light coming through the eye here. And then it became I'm getting to the point now where I'm only adding a new bird every couple weeks. Keep in mind the first 3 days and you're able to do 100 birds, and then it's the law of diminishing returns. I'm down to a bird every couple weeks. And so I'm going into, and then you got to go to specific locations. This is Marshall Swamp Trail, and I go in there completely geared up. I've got a mosquito net and I've got long sleeves. I actually use latex gloves on my hands because of the mosquitoes. And inevitably, when I'm on a bird and I'm trying to photograph it and I'm concentrating, I will start getting mosquitoes all over my hand trying to eat me. And it's very distracting. And if you photographed birds like this in the trees, you may have a third of a second to get the bird in the camera, and maybe another third of a second to focus if you're lucky, before that opportunity is gone. So you can't be distracted by mosquitoes. So I found that latex gloves, obviously mosquito spray, but I'm wearing my boots and everything. I look ridiculous going in there. I always love when there's some couple that's visiting from out of town and they're wearing shorts and t-shirts and they walk by me. I like looking over my shoulder after they pass me. They all usually do like a double take trying to figure out what I'm doing. This is the California scrub jay. Now, my other son, Lucas, lives in California. I've had the opportunity to go visit him. I've actually had a chance to see all of the scrub jays in the United States. The Western scrub jay, prior to 2016, included all of the scrub jays from California up into Colorado and partially into Texas. Well, since 2016, the Woodhouse scrub jay was broken out for the Rocky Mountain region and central, kind of the central west area, and then the California scrub jay was designated in the California area. And then this year I've been able to go to Santa Cruz Island off the coast of California and get to see the island scrub jay, which is different than all of those. So that's pretty fun. Plus, we were in Arizona this summer and I got to see the Mexican jay. The Mexican jay, to me, seems like a scrub jay and acts a lot like a scrub jay. It's gathering nuts and hiding them, and it's loud and raucous like the scrub jays. And that's another question for Max. We could probably have a talk about that for hours, but these are California birds. So I was able to add quite a few birds to my national list last year as well. I was photographing in this park and this guy came in out of nowhere and I'm like, what is that? And it turned out to be a white-tailed kite. And it was just so fun to see this out of nowhere. It just flew in and it was like right over my head. And it was being chased by this raven. And then it did this move where it, instead of turning around to try to get to the raven, it just tucked under itself and lunged at the raven. It was absolutely amazing. They have the Wilson's warbler out there. I've yet to see one in Florida. I need to get one for the state. Now, the thing that was going on, we flew out of Las Vegas, and we stopped at one of the parks there to do some birding and got the Gambel's quail and the Virden, which is a really cool little bird. This was September of last year. We were out in California visiting with my new granddaughter, which was really fun and very distracting. And I barely was aware that there was a storm in Florida. Well, we barely got back the day before the storm. And the day before the storm, I decided to go out to WEC to see if anything was acting up or going on. The storm was down in the Gulf side of the state, and it was coming up through the state, potentially across the state. We didn't really know for sure at that point. We didn't know how it was going to affect this. So we're trying to see if there's any different bird activity. I ran into Tom Hintz in the evening before the storm at WEC, and we chatted for a little bit, and there really wasn't anything going on. Well, the next morning I woke up and I had power. Well, where I live, we have a lot of trees, and typically if we've got power, nothing's really happened here. So I immediately threw everything in the car and I was out birding. My first thing was to text Tom and see what he was up to. I was driving out, and I figured I would go to WEC, Lake Weir, or maybe Fort McCoy. And about the time I was getting ready to contact him, he contacted me and goes, "There are American avocet at WEC." And he's freaking out. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to get across there. And what was neat is everything was closed. Everybody decided to close down, all the businesses, all the schools and that. So I was probably driving a little faster than I should have been to get out to WEC. But these are the American avocets that were out at WEC. Now, keep in mind, the storm was still going on. At this point, it had crossed the state, and it's now on the East Coast around Daytona, and it has these counterclockwise bands that are reaching into the state. So Tom had been here about 5 minutes before me. I got these, and I'm communicating with Tom. I'm like, all right, Tom, what's your plan? And he was thinking about going to Lake Weir, and I was looking at the radar, and we're getting a lot of rain at Lake Weir. And I figured that might be a little tough, but there were these bands that were kind of coming in thin right over Fort McCoy. I'm like, Tom, how about Fort McCoy? Let's go there. He agreed. So he was heading out there. He's a few minutes in front of me. We're both racing out to Fort McCoy. And he starts calling and texting me, and he was losing his mind at Fort McCoy because at Fort McCoy, it was filled with all sorts of things. There were American golden plover. There were clouds of terns. These are redneck phalaropes. I never even knew the bird existed prior to this moment. And there's redneck phalaropes. There were terns everywhere. We had an Arctic tern in here. We had different terns here, and we had different terns at Lake Weir. It was surreal. This particular day was just unbelievable. Then we went over to Lake Weir. This is actually a bridal tern in the middle of this. It's not really identifiable, but there's a bridal tern in the middle of this. I love this image because it looks like some moody winter scene in the North Atlantic, but this is Lake Weir, and this is the intensity of the storm in that. So Tom is scoping, and I'm searching around with my camera and photographing anything that's moving, anything that I can see. It's because it's difficult. We have wind blowing and we've got rain blowing. And he's looking through the scope, and he picks up this bridal tern. And I happen to look up in the mist, and I catch this Pomeranian Jaeger flying by. Now again, I photographed it. I had to photograph it to identify it. I had no idea what this bird was. I bring the camera over to Tom, and Tom's jumping up and down like a 10-year-old boy. It was we had so much fun. It was he's like, "That's a Pomeranian Jaeger." I'm like, "Okay." It was pretty spectacular, and it was very, very unusual. We had many firsts for the county, including this bird. This was the first time this had been recorded in the county, but I'm convinced that these guys have been here in the county before, and they might be here more regular than we know. But anyway, this guy basically was being chased by this other bird, and it essentially just disappeared into the mist, and it was gone. Didn't see it again. Didn't have another opportunity to shoot it. Just happened to look up and get the shot. And it's like, again, I think how many birds are getting by that we're not seeing. So that was super exciting. It added 12 birds to my count. The numbers were adding up, so I just kind of kept moving my goal up 10 birds. So at this point, I'm getting closer to the end of the year, and ended up getting this chestnut-sided warbler at Carney Island. Not a great picture, but it's enough to identify. And again, the focus is not where I need it, but it's an identifiable shot. Max and I then in October of last year went down to South Florida, and we birded a bunch in Miami, and we went down to the Hawk Watch down in the Keys, and that was a fantastic time. This is a Merlin. This is a common myna. This is actually native to India, but they're down in South Florida. It's the white-crowned pigeon. But then when the peregrine falcons, we had all kinds of different hawks and different birds and that. It was pretty neat. We actually got to see merlins take off south out of Key West from the beach, just go. And they weren't that high. They were maybe 50 feet in the air and they just went. And we were watching with the binoculars. I was thinking maybe they're chasing, because there had been some other birds, some yellow-rumped warblers that went south. And I was thinking maybe it's chasing those and it's going to come back. And we just watched it until it disappeared. And like, wow, we just watched this guy take off and fly maybe to Cuba or wherever it's going to go next. And we got to see several birds do that, just take off and go south. So at this point, I have very few birds left that I can get in the county. And I'm thinking, I'm kind of pulling my hair out because it's very frustrating. And I also have to stop what I'm doing and to go, all right, I just need to bird and enjoy birding. Because if you go out every time thinking, I got to get a new bird, it becomes a little bit frustrating and difficult. So I kind of was relaxed, but at the same time, I also had a mission. And I was going through and I was looking at, okay, here, this time of the year, October, November, we start getting some of the geese and some of the larger waterfowl start coming to this area. So I was looking through the history on eBird of where these birds were being found. Some were in small ponds basically in people's farms. And so I made this route and I was driving the county, going to these ponds, hoping to see something and hoping to see something. And I wasn't getting anything. And one afternoon, I'm like, I'll just go over to WEC and then I'm going to wrap it up and then I'm going to go home. And I come around the corner to the large pond at WEC and there's a bunch of Canada goose there. And there's this white domestic duck in the middle of them. I'm like, why is this white duck in the middle of them? And I looked at it a little bit closer and it has this little sideways smile. And I'm like, oh, you're a snow goose. I'm like, oh my gosh. It's just finding these birds for the first time and seeing them for the first time is probably like the most exciting thing. It's super, super fun to be able to share that. And of course, I relay this information as quick as I can to Michelle and to everybody in the club. And you know, it's always so great to get the information from everybody in the club. And it's so fun to race out and see these new birds and that. But to be able to get one and share it with everybody is just, it's super enjoyable. And this guy stayed around for a while. I think most everybody got a chance to see him. Then we had another storm that came in. It wasn't quite as intense, and I went back out to Lake Weir and got some eared grebe, but that was pretty much it. We didn't bring in too many different birds. But essentially, when that storm started lighting up, it was still raining, it was still blowing, but as soon as it lightened a little bit, the birds basically take off. You can actually watch them leaving and heading out to the coast, and they're gone. They're not staying around for very long. That day, by the way, of hurricane, I think it was Hurricane Ian, we added 12 birds to the list. So that was a huge improvement. Now, Tom did a big year the year before. Had he had that storm, he would have been at probably 260, 265 birds. And then we had the vermilion flycatcher show up at the wetlands. That was a special treat. And she's back again this year, which is really cool. Hopefully she'll bring more and we'll see, maybe eventually see a male. So then you have the one-offs. This was, I forget who saw this initially. This was at the wetlands as well. This is a LeConte sparrow. This guy was down in the grass. I was able to see him to get this image. Luckily, I'm manually focusing. The camera can't automatically focus on that eye. I have to manually focus on that in just a few seconds. This guy came out just briefly to be seen, and I did not see him again. Doug was out quickly after me, and I was trying to help him pull this bird out, and he would not come out, and it wasn't seen again after that. So this was a huge win as far as adding this bird to the list for the year. This was getting close. This was in December. I'm looking at my list here. This was in November of last year. There's a GBH, a great blue heron, with the snake decided he didn't get it. He didn't catch the snake by the head, so that he coiled around and almost bit him in the eye. It's like kind of a risky encounter, grabbing snakes like that. And then you have moments like this where you get up and it's cold in the morning and you get out of this nice warm bed and you're thinking, what am I doing? I'm like, I'm putting on my layers. I'm going to get my coat on. Of course, I'm a Floridian now. So I'm wearing all these layers because it's like almost 50 degrees outside or whatever it was. It was probably a little colder than that, but then you get there and you think, oh my goodness, look at this. This rivals those scenes that we saw before from the mall in Washington, D.C. and that as far as the quality of light and that. But this again is just a moment and be able to see those and be able to capture that. It's kind of fun to be able to step back and like, all right, this is pretty cool. Even though it's a lot of work, it's very cool when you get an opportunity to see this. These are the American pippin. Scott Robinson helped me quite a bit. He was able to get a few birds. This is these guys were up at the UF Research Center on the turf. This is golf turf they grow up there for testing. And the pippins, for whatever reason, for this one little short window of time, were loving going around in this grass and picking off insects. There's our vermilion flycatcher again. And then I finally got it. This was the bird that tied. This is the bird. This was 251 for me. This tied the record for Marion County in 1 year. This is the white-fronted goose. And actually, Alice found this at Glen Hill. So there was a little bit of relief. It was tied at this point, and but it was like, I can't believe it. I can't honestly, I couldn't believe that I got over 200 birds, let alone 251, and just kept going, kept doing stuff, and kept going out to other areas. This is the broad-billed hummingbird that was up in Micanopy. Now, doing these little side shoots to other parts of the state, especially the coast, and getting the water birds, I didn't even realize what I was racking up with the state. I had no intention of racking up high numbers with the state of Florida. I was really focused on Marion County, but I kind of proved a point at the same time, is if you focus hard on Marion County and you do some other side adventures to key locations like South Florida and to the different beaches and maybe up to the Panhandle, you can accumulate quite a few birds in 1 year. Oops, wrong way. There's the loons. The loons are so elegant and mysterious. It's so cool to see them. So the year's winding down, and I had a painted bunting still that I needed. So I got a painted bunting. I talked around, found some people that were really kind and generous that had painted buntings coming to a feeder in their backyard. I stalked their feeder and hung out with them for a morning and got very fortunate. I had a female painted bunting that came in. I was able to get the painted bunting to take 252 number. And we're at the end of the year. It's December 30th. We were spending New Year's Eve at my in-laws, and we decided to go down a day early on December 30th. We arrived in Orlando at 5:30. It wasn't 20 minutes that we were there, and I started getting information from Michelle and others that the northern pintail had been spotted at WEC. So on December 31st, 2021, I drove from Orlando back to Ocala in the dark at about 5 o'clock in the morning and got to WEC and set up in the dark. And I learned a lesson from that too, that the ducks are plentiful before sunrise. If you're there at first light, you will see the most ducks in any particular area. As soon as the sky starts lighting, well before sunrise, they start taking off and moving. So if you want to see a duck, if you're looking for a particular duck, get there early. Don't be comfortable and stay in bed. Get out there in the cold and find the duck. So I got there, and sure enough, there was the female northern pintail for number 253. Now, this was the number on January 1st, 2023. This was my record. Within a short period of time, I think it was only a couple of weeks later, they changed the rules on me, and they pulled out exotic escapees, and they determined that a variety of different birds were exotic escapees, including the ruddy shell duck, which I got to watch that. Actually, I watched a group of them breed multiple young over at Glen Hill farm, but it's irrelevant. That they decided that 3 of the birds that I had on my list don't count because they're technically escapees. So my number went from 253 to 250 because of a rule change. But the interesting thing that I really wasn't doing intentionally was on the state, for the state of Florida, I ranked 18th. Now, throughout the year, there were all sorts of birds that were popping up as rare bird alerts that were within range, within a few hours drive of Marion County, that I could have gone and picked up, and I probably could have moved up that. But this really wasn't my goal for the year as far as the state, but it was pretty interesting, and it proved a point. If you focus on Marion County, there's a ton of really good birds here. You get as many as you can here, and you go elsewhere, you can actually you can get a pretty good ranking in the state for the year. So that concludes my presentation, and I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm loving birding, but as far as I'm concerned, I'm just getting started. I don't have any plans of any other big years right now, but I just know that I love birding, and I will be continuing it for quite some time. I'm actually enjoying traveling and seeing birds in different environments and getting totally different species. And that's super enjoyable. It also makes traveling really fun and interesting, knowing that you're going to drop into a location where there's totally different species to see. So it's quite fun to be able to bird, and I'm really enjoying it, even though I've been doing it for just over 2 years. It's been 2 years the summer after the summer of 2021 to 2023, and about 2.5 years of birding at this point. So I'm learning and enjoying it. And one of the best things, answering my wife's question, there's so many reasons why I love birding. And one of the huge reasons is that I get to bird with my son, Max, and I get to spend time with him. And that's probably one of the most enjoyable things as well. So there's all sorts of benefits to birding. I don't understand why everybody isn't birding. I think it would probably change the world for the better if everybody would just take a moment and bird every day. All right. I'm hoping I'm still here with you guys. Is anybody out there, Marty? Are you in there?
We'll have a dozen people out here watching.
Good. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Yeah, what's the best way to come up with a route to do a big year?
To come up with a route?
Yeah, like earlier you said that you had specific routes that you would travel in Marion County to go
Yeah,
and try to
well,
see birds.
I would guess I wouldn't call it a route per se. And now if I'm trying to do a whole bunch of different locations within one day, I would plan a route on where I want to get to first thing in the morning and so on. I'm primarily looking for environments. I'm looking for wooded environments, water features. I'm looking for the species that are going to most likely be found in those areas, and that's what I'm focusing on. So it's more of the habitats or the hotspots, the parks, figuring out an area where there's potential for birds to appear, and then just repeatedly birding that location. And it can get tedious at times, but it's well worth it, because if you keep going to a site, you're going to learn a ton of information. Usually you're going to see some of the same birds over and over again. You might get to see some different behaviors from them. You start picking up things and learning how they're interacting with one another. And then when something new comes in, it's easier for you to recognize it because you're already kind of building up some information about that location. So I did a lot of birding in individual locations over and over and over again. Like I would do Orange Creek Preservation Area on the Marion County side, sometimes 3 or 4 times in 1 week. And it's a long drive for me, but I would hit some other spots on the way up there, and they're just repetition and persistence is where it's at. Anybody have any other questions?
Do you keep like a physical book life list, or is it just all on Bird?
Well, it's a good question. Well, since I started 2 years ago. Everything has been so well documented with eBird that I don't really do anything other than eBird. I try to, I don't add notes as much as I should to my bird list, but if there's something that does occur, I may add an extra note or two into the list in eBird, but it's basically all in eBird. It keeps it all digital, keeps it easy. I don't have to drag a bunch of things around, and it makes it nice.
Yeah, because they make physical books. Like I have the Sibley birder life list and field diary, and I just copy everything from eBird down to there because I'm paranoid about like, oh, what if eBird's server goes down and I lose all my stuff? So it is nice to have that physical thing. And then it's a nice like heirloom almost to pass down to your kids.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very cool. I like that. That's a good idea. Um, yeah, I kind of like, again, I love the data. I love the way that eBird stores everything, so you can actually, you check the date and the location and things so accurately and be able to know exactly what was happening.
Ron had the question of where in Fort McCoy were you talking about?
Fort McCoy Sod Farm, I forget I think it's Michelle might know this. What's the highway number? Is it like 318? It's essentially east of town, and not quite to Silver Springs boat basin, but almost there. And then it's north of that. So you go out Route 40 and then go north. There's a sod farm called Fort McCoy Sod Farm, and they have just basically an open grass area, and that's where a lot of the shorebirds will gather, especially when they're migrating. And if you get there after rain and there's water puddled, it's a lot of times you can find different exotic birds that are feeding there.
Also, just as a general statement, for the Fort McCoy sod farm, it's a really good spot for eastern meadowlarks and loggerhead shrikes and some other species that might be harder to find in the rest of Marion County if you're trying to do big day or big year or something like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because the other thing too is, I mean, if you're doing a big year in the county, is to really find those places where you can get those particular birds, like the red-headed woodpecker is really can be found at the wetlands, and there's other places in the county where it can be found, but it's found reliably there. So that plays a big factor. And if you can find a place that has a reliable species and note that and kind of have it in the back of your mind, or keep a record of it and have it planned as one of your places to go, it's going to make it easier to start checking those birds off.
Yeah, we
I
had
did want to mention
Yep.
about the sod farm. That is private property. So when birding that, just stay along the main road, but you can set up a scope from the side of the road and view a good portion of the sod farm.
Yeah, most of all of the viewing that I've done there has been from the road, and you can get really good shots in that. Now, the day of the storm, it was closed and there was nobody there, and it was a little conflicting because we've had workers there that had no problems with us coming in and birding, and then the owner sometimes would had no problem, but he doesn't like people being there birding on the property, so it's better to bird from the road over the Fort McCoy sod farm. But you basically just pull off on the side of the road, and you can use your binoculars or your spotting scope, and you can see quite a ways in there. But just check for those water puddles, because there's usually something near them at any given time. Max, I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, I wouldn't miss it.
Well, you're the reason why I'm birding. So it's
Well, glad to get you addicted.
what's that?
I'm glad to get you addicted to it.
Yeah, somewhat. It's finally stuck. And I've since tried to photograph landscapes, and it's so boring photographing landscapes after photographing birds for about 2 years now.
Yeah.
It's so hard to stand still and to wait for the light to get just right.
Well, now you know how I felt when we were trying to wait for sunrise and golden hour in Arches and Monument Valley and all these different areas, trying to flip over rocks and wait for something to fly by or run across the street and try and get a photo of a living animal.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
no, it's fun. It's the learning the techniques of doing the landscape photography is a really good way to get your fundamentals for doing wildlife photography, because if you have the thought process and the mentality of knowing what your settings are, knowing how I have XYZ lighting, I've got overcast or I'm in sunrise, I've got direct or side or backlight, and my subject is in shadow or it's in that direct light or it's half exposed and half unexposed, how to set your camera so that way you can get a good exposure on your subject. It's vital to actually getting a decent photo, even if it's a mugshot of something that could be a rare bird alert, or it could be something that's not typical, or it's a lifer or something like that, where you want to have that photo to prove, like, say, oh, I did see this. I saw Western tanager over here. I saw whatever it was for the Pomeranian Jaeger that you had. Um, Getting that fundamentals down was vital to actually being able to do wildlife and bird photography and know how to get your settings in and play around with it so you can get good stuff.
Yeah, you're just doing all those settings a lot faster.
Yeah. You're speeding up, but you get the practice and the repetition of doing it with landscape or doing it with people. People are great because people are a lot slower than birds.
Usually, yeah.
Usually, especially mammals. Mammals are a lot slower than birds for the most part.
Right. It's fun. Does anybody else have any questions? You can turn your mics back on if you'd like.
Are you generally using manual focus when you're say you're taking pictures of something moving quickly, like a warbler or kinglet or something like that? Are you using manual focus?
Yeah. Yeah. I've got my camera is, well, I've just changed lenses, but I've got a, essentially I'm using my pinky. You can actually see it in this picture that's there now. My pinky is on the focus ring and I can fine tune the focus with that. I will autofocus to get close in that area, then I'll fine tune the focus with the pinky really fast. But the little guys like the wrens and the songbirds that are in trees that are behind multiple branches, there's absolutely no way you can autofocus on them. I'm shooting with a better camera now that does have some really good bird autofocus capabilities, but even then you can't really get into those birds if they're super deep in there. So you really have to autofocus on that. And it takes a lot of practice. And I have a lot of, I like to call them mug shots. They're just good enough that you can almost tell and identify the bird, but you really don't want to share them with anybody. But
Yeah.
yeah, so you usually have mug shots. You either have completely nothing or you have mug shots, and then probably one out of every few hundred or 1,000 images you get one that's really stunning that you want to share with everybody. That's kind of, and for me that's difficult because I've always done everything with trying to make the images perfect. With landscape photography and with commercial photography, you pretty much have to, especially when you're selling it for commercial photography. So it's a whole different mindset of coming into photography and shooting birds. So doing it in such a way that it's a little more free form, and you just got to go with whatever you get and be okay with it.
Hey, Kent.
Hey, Ron.
Hey there. With your new camera, can it rapidly acquire a flying bird, set it as a target, and trace it and keep the focus in focus as it goes?
Yeah, it really does. And again, unless you've got a tree or something in the way, it locks on fast. It's pretty exciting. I've kind of built up to that. I've always done well with kind of mid-range cameras. I don't really get into the crazy expensive cameras until I finally decided to just recently with birding, as I'm shooting with a Nikon Z9, and the autofocus on it is unbelievable. It's really amazing. And if you're close enough, it will lock in on the eye of the bird. It's good enough that it recognizes the shape of the bird. But if you get a bird that you have the eye that you can distinguish the eye, and I mean it's relatively small, it'll put another focus box on that eye, and it'll stay on that eye, and it's very nice.
Wow.
It's very nice.
Wow. Okay. Thanks.
So, as a tip for anyone that doesn't have a super substantial autofocus, if you're wanting to practice, the Ocala wetlands and Tuscarora as far as Marion County at least, are two really good spots to go. If you go to the boardwalk on the Ocala Recharge Park, the Ocala Wetlands, the boat-tailed grackles and the red-winged blackbirds that hang out in the cattails and the reeds, trying to focus on the blackbirds and the grackles that are in those reeds, or maybe 2 or 3 plants deep inside of that, trying to get a good focus on the eye is a really good way to practice your focus when you're trying to hunt for a blue-gray gnatcatcher or a ruby-crowned kinglet or a warbler that's deeper inside of thicker brush. For flying, if you go to a more exposed area, if you go to Lake Weir, or if you go to the coast and you go to photograph gulls, you can practice your autofocus, or your manual focus rather, on the birds while they're flying, while you would normally in that case have your autofocus work usually pretty okay. But if you practice with your manual focus there, where your environment is a little bit easier to deal with for autofocus, you can build up that muscle memory of how to move your manual focus back and forth to get your subject in better than you would normally. So if you're having to pan with, say, like a snail kite that's flying across low over water, where you have background of trees, you have water, you've got coots and gallinules and ducks and stuff that the autofocus might try and key in on, you already have that muscle memory and that experience of panning the gulls that are just over the horizon, or an osprey or whatever it is that you spent the time with learning how to do a manual focus of flying focus. Being able to do that is how you can really key in some of your shots while you're getting these birds that might be a little bit more difficult if you're just basing your settings off of everything being taken care of by the camera itself. Sometimes you have to take over the computer, and the system that's inside of the camera is great 99% of the time, but that's 1% of the time where you want to get that really good shot, and it's a difficult shot to get, that you have to use your own intuition, your own experience to take over and make the photo.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's another thing to keep in mind, is that, like, if you take a bird that's a little more cooperative, like the red-winged blackbirds, you can get relatively close to them, or the grackles, you can get relatively close to them and they're going to let you cooperate. The flycatchers will let you cooperate, and you can build up your skills from that. But all of this is practice and repetition, and not to get discouraged, but you basically just need to go out and do it. And you got to know that there's going to be times when you're not going to get a great image, and there's nothing wrong with that. You just keep doing it, and you'll eventually get some really great shots, and you'll realize why. You'll see that, oh, the light was better here, or I was at a different angle and it worked out well this way. And you kind of build this library of information as you're doing it. And then eventually, when you get into the trickier birds that are going to stay down in the weeds, you take that skill set that you've developed and you basically make it a little bit better, and you just keep improving. So it's patience and repetition. It'll get you there, but you gotta stick with it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ron. Glad you were here. Any other questions?
Not a question, but you guys, you and Max both should consider doing like a small photography class or something like that.
We could. Yeah, we could definitely do that.
Yeah, we could definitely try and figure something out.
Yeah, we could definitely do that. We'll just look at the programs. Maybe for next year we can add something like that. It would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we'll keep in contact about it.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thanks, Alex.
Mhm.
All right. I think we'll wrap it up here. And I thank you guys all for coming out and watching, and I look forward to birding with you. So we'll see you around out there birding.
Thanks, bye.
Thanks, Kent.
Thanks,
you.
Dad.
You're welcome, guys.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thanks for being here, you guys.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good night.